On Monday evening, the 31st of March, BBC Television Northern Ireland began a series of programmes called Blueprint, which purport to tell the story, the theoretical history of the island of Ireland over the past 600 million years. This has, of course, aroused much opposition from Christians who believe in biblical creation. On Sunday Sequence on Radio Ulster, on Sunday the 30th of March, there was a debate chaired by the presenter of the Blueprint programme, William Crawley, in which he invited two Christians who are creationists, Dr. Robert Beckett and Professor Norman Nevin, to debate with a theistic evolutionist, David Livingstone, and another atheist. And you will hear this debate first of all. That will then be followed by the Talkback programme that was broadcast on Monday the 31st of March. On our ministry website, we have encouraged people to email the BBC and complain about the use of the licence fee money of Christians who believe in biblical creation to fund this programme, which rules out such a possibility. As a result of that article on our website, I was invited by Talkback to take part in a phone-in discussion, and what you will hear in the second part of the tape is what took place. This has been Cecil Andrews of Take Heed Ministries.
Again, it's been one of the key battlegrounds in the so-called culture wars of the past 20 years or so, with skirmishes fought in courtrooms, council chambers, classrooms and churches across America. I hope you got the alliteration there. And increasingly the battle is being fought in Northern Ireland too. I'm talking, of course, of the ideological war between creationists and evolutionists. Many of you are pursuing that debate on my BBC blog, Will and Testament, as I speak. Well, tomorrow night, BBC Northern Ireland launches a major new natural history series, which I happen to present on TV, radio and online. Blueprint tries to tell the story of this island and particularly Northern Ireland's place in that natural history. But any attempt at natural history on television is bound to provoke yet more debate about just how old our world actually is. We can't debate the Blueprint series since nobody's actually seen it yet, but we can explore one of the most fundamental questions in all of natural history. Just how old is the world and how did it get here? Simple question for a Sunday morning, so we have brought together four guests who pretty much represent the variety of positions one might hold on the question of planetary and human origins. I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Robert Beckett from Creation Outreach Ministries. He's a young earth creationist who contends that the world is about, I think, Robert, about 6,000 years old in your judgment. Certainly not very much more than that. Norman Nevin, former professor of medical genetics at Queen's University, is an exponent of intelligent design theory. David Livingstone, professor of intellectual history at Queen's, believes in both evolution and God. And Professor Peter Bowler, an historian of Darwinism, is an agnostic who believes evolution is the only scientific game in town, and his latest book on Darwin will be published next year. Every time I have Peter Bowler on the programme, I have to say, and his latest book on Darwin will be published in about 20 minutes' time. He's always writing another one. Welcome to you all. You're very welcome to the programme. Robert, can we start with you? Your position is young earth creationism. What is it and why do you hold that view?
Young earth creationism position is that the earth is relatively young. It's not the millions or billions of years that are often cited, but its age can be measured in thousands of years. I hold to that position for a number of reasons. I do believe there are two evidences. First of all, there is the most reliable history book in the world, which is the Bible. And it stands on its own in terms of its history of the world and of the human race. And it very, very clearly states that the earth is quite young. And indeed there are very, very detailed genealogies that go right back to the first human being who was on the earth that can be used to date that. And these genealogies have been subject to detailed analysis and have stood up to that analysis. I also believe it because the history of people, of populations, of communities, of civilizations indicates that the earth is also relatively young. I do also believe that there are many scientific evidences for it that are largely neglected, things such as the decreasing size of the Earth's magnetic field, which would indicate the Earth must be less than 10,000 years of age. The rate of erosion of continents, which indicates that the Earth must be comparatively young. The existence of helium within rocks, and helium normally diffuses out of rocks, and the amount of salt within the oceans, which again indicates at the present rates of accumulation the Earth is very, very young. I also have problems with some of the indicators that have been put forward for the old Earth. For example, radioactive dating. Radioactive dating measures the amount of the radioactive isotopes in the rocks, doesn't measure the ages of the rocks. The ages which are deducted from that depend on some assumptions which cannot be proven. For example, no one knows the amount of the radioactive isotopes that were originally present in the rock. No one can be sure that the present rate of radioactive decay is the same as it was even 1,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago, or 100 million years ago. Indeed, there are quite significant indicators that that rate does change depending upon the chemical and temperature conditions in which the rock is.
Okay, so that opens up the young Earth creationist position. The world was created by God, and it was created just a few thousand years ago, and Robert's pointing to the Bible, to empirical investigation, and even to science to give evidence for that claim. Peter Bowler, what's your view, and why do you hold it?
Well, I'm an old age earther. The reason why I would support that is partly due to my professional position as a historian of science. The position that's just been outlined, that the Earth is only a few thousand years old, was held by working geologists 200 or 300 years ago, and they have systematically retreated from that position over the centuries as more and more evidence has accumulated. And I don't think it's worthwhile getting into detailed arguments about dating techniques, but the reason why geologists accepted a greater age, not necessarily the age we have accept today, but a much greater one than just a few thousand years, was the sheer complexity of the geological record.
How old is the Earth?
The current scientific estimate is 4.5 billion years, but you don't have to accept that to look at the record of the rocks and see that there is a sequence of events in the compilation of the structure of the Earth, which is extremely difficult to explain in just a few thousand years. I mean, for instance, if it was all due to one great flood, there are places where the rocks are interleaved with volcanic ash sediments. There are places where there are ripple marks and footprints on one layer of sediment with more sediment laid on top of it. So that doesn't fit with the idea they're all being deposited under a flood. There are places where strata have been consolidated, twisted, eroded, and then more strata laid on top at a different angle. There have to be two major events there. So without getting into technical arguments about dating, it seems to me that there are too many formations in the rocks which are indicative of a complex sequence of events that must take a significant amount of time, whether or not you buy into the 4.5 billion years.
So two very contrasting positions straight away. One is religious, the other is secular. One is a young Earth position, the other is a very old Earth position. 6,000 years versus 4.6 or 4.7 billion years. David Livingston, your position, and why do you hold it?
Well, I guess the position that I would hold here is that we are setting the whole thing up as a kind of necessary and inevitable debate between...
Sounding like one already.
Yeah, religious believers on one hand, and on the other hand you have evolution or long Earth history or whatever, however you want to put it. I just query that that's the right way to think about this, because I think that there's no necessary incompatibility between believing in both of these, or necessarily disbelieving in both of them for that matter. It'd be entirely possible for a person not to have any religious beliefs and also to reject natural selection. There are a number around now, for example, who think that there are other ways we might think about human development, or indeed the development of organisms, or for that matter believing in God and also believing in a long Earth history and evolutionary change. Now, I come about this rather more, to some degree, like Peter, from a historical perspective, looking at the history of these debates. And what strikes me immediately from what we've already been talking about with respect to the age of the Earth is that issues of chronology, or how long the Earth has been here, really predate all this debate about geology whatsoever. Already by the 4th century, Augustine was very concerned about what were known as pagan chronicles. That is to say, information that seemed to be coming from Babylonian civilizations, from other Chinese civilizations, and so on. And dismissing these in Augustine's case as pagan and therefore not to be taken seriously. But already then, by I think the late 1500s or into the early 17th century, people are thinking we have to find ways of reading the Bible that it shows its compatibility with ideas of Earth history that are at least thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years old, simply because of the chronologies and histories that are coming from other peoples. So to think that this is already a modern debate just about strata or about radiometric dating or anything of this sort, I think is ignoring a very, very long history. And it's the kind of history that goes to these earlier times. It strikes me as very interesting as to why these should have always been such a source of controversy and a source of debate. And I think we're running through these debates again, albeit with more sophisticated scientific language.
Why are we doing that at this point?
Well, I think that we're doing this at this point for a whole range of things, because when we're talking about evolution versus creation, we're not just talking about science. I think we're talking about modern culture. I think we're talking about how we think of ourselves as human beings. I think we're thinking about human identity and things of this sort. So it does seem to me quite interesting that Christian creationists in the United States have been teaming up with Islamic creationists, for example, in Turkey, because they seem to me to be interested in and concerned about precisely the same kinds of cultural breakdowns that are evident on both sides of the old world and the new world. So I would give that a cultural explanation, answer that question.
Some of it to do with fear.
I think a lot of it to do with fear, or anxiety about cultural collapse, or anxiety about society moving in directions that are in a way that these people would not be
so
happy with.
Three very different positions. Again, young Earth creationism, an old Earth secular perspective on the science, and David complicating it and saying that it's possible to be a Christian who believes in evolution. It's possible to be an agnostic who doesn't believe in evolution. It's much more muddied than that. Norman Nevin, what's your position and why do you hold it?
I think that the argument, the debate of creation versus evolution at times tends to be sterile. I would come from this from an intelligent design point of view. Now, David was talking about the of this debate, and I would agree with that. The whole concept that when we look at the universe, and when we look at, particularly from my aspect as a biologist and a medical scientist, there is obvious design that we see in everything. Now, the problem, I think, has been that Christians get entangled with endless arguments over Genesis chapter 1. Now, I'm not denying the truth of Genesis chapter 1, but what I'm saying is that is sterile, and I would tend to jump over Genesis 1 and go to John chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Greek word there is logos, which means intelligence, reason, rationality, and information.
Robert says that the Bible clearly states that the Earth is young, just a few years, 1,000 years old.
Well, I would rather approach it from what I would count a scientific point of view and look at the argument for design. Now, there are many people and scientists who are non-Christians who hold that point of view. But I think if you move into that direction, then one gets away from this sterile argument.
So to be clear about this, Norman, you don't really mind how old the Earth is as long as God designed it.
Yes, I mean when I look at the universe and look at the physical constants of the universe, they are accurate to 6 decimal places.
Right.
And one can look there and see a design.
Sure.
And when you have design, there must be intelligence. When I look at the DNA, in fact, the information that is available to the DNA is just unbelievable. And one would argue that where you have a code, and in fact in the DNA you have several codes, where you have coding, there must be intelligence. So I
understand that. I absolutely understand your position. So to clarify this, we've got one young Earth position, we've got two old Earth positions, it seems. Where are you on this? Are you 6,000 years or 4.6? You're a young Earth creationist, but you don't think that's absolutely the key debate?
No, the key debate isn't that. I mean, there are those who accept intelligent design. I think where the debate lies is what is the definition of science?
Yes.
And as a scientist working in a laboratory, one would actually do an experiment, find the answer, and draw your conclusions. But in fact, what has happened with science, it's become naturalism or materialism, and in fact, one finds that you cannot bring into the argument any supernatural influence.
Peter Buller.
Well, I suppose my response to that would be that the great danger of admitting supernatural influences is that you close off the possibility of doing research. I mean, no one is shaking his head at that, but to play the historical card, traditionally we've seen cases where things are claimed to be impossible to be explained naturally. This is the God of the gaps position, and sooner or later they evidence comes, new approaches are tried, which shows that they can be explained. And so
maybe we can make it clearer with an example, Norman. How do you think a supernatural explanation would help science? Can you give an example of how you'd like to see supernaturalistic explanations function in science?
Well, I think when you look at something like DNA and look at the information that is available in DNA and how that controls everything, not only the DNA, but the complexity of a human cell and of the parts of the human cell, the scientists cannot explain, for example, why a particular, let's say, motor within a cell can come about as a result of small mutational changes. So that there comes a point, and I would pick Peter up and say that it's not a God of a gap, because many of the people who are involved in intelligent design are individuals who are working on the bench, who are carrying out experiments, who are top-class scientists and professors in universities. In fact...
This is the position of irreducible complexity, though actually,
absolutely.
Interestingly enough, I've just seen some articles recently where some scientists say they now feel they can do precisely that, and they have new work that...
This is the problem, that one can look for different ways of approaching this, and I just, as I say, I worry that the scientists who may accept this position, but are they actually using it constructively in their research? Rather than taking this as a background and then doing something else with their research.
David
Well, personally, I think we're not going to get very far on debating what passes as science and what doesn't. But I don't think we're going to get a clear definition of what's allowed in and what's not allowed in here. And I think that all we're going to have to do is whatever theories come forward, we're going to have to do our best to test these, and to test these by trying to either verify them or falsify them. But the thing about Norman's position that I think is interesting and ought to be part of this conversation is the substantial historical theological opposition to worrying about design. In the 19th century, many evangelical people, for example, did not like the turn to design because it presumed that the world was too perfect. It presumed that design was actually discernible and that this was a form of arrogance, that human beings could actually divine, as it were, God's design in the world. So there's a lot of theological opposition to putting far too much packaging into design. I think that further complicates the argument. It's not just, therefore, an argument between design theorists and secular scientists. It might be an argument between design theorists and theologians who don't like the turn to design because of its sterility.
This is the danger, in a way, of the God of the Gaps tradition, because if you use a theological explanation to explain something that is currently in need of an explanation, when in the future a scientific explanation comes along that does that job, it almost makes God redundant, and it looks like you're kind of running away from the argument. Robert Beckett.
Yes. I would agree with the position that Norman has put. There are essentially two strands of evidence when we're searching for truth. One is the strand of evidence that comes from what I would call the book of Revelation, from the Bible, and the strand of evidence which comes from the book of science. And while those two are separate, they ought to be related and they ought to coordinate. And the theory that is described as intelligent design is saying we're wanting to look at the world around us and say, can everything be explained by mindless, purposeless chance, which is what evolution essentially is. And I would have to take issue with David because I believe that is the basic definition of evolution. Mindless, purposeless process that produces human beings by chance. Now, God-guided evolution isn't evolution at all as far as science normally understands it. It's a contradiction in terms. And I have great difficulty with his position from that perspective.
So you think the idea of theistic evolution, of God-oriented evolution, is both theologically questionable and scientifically questionable?
Yes, without a doubt.
Can I just come back on this? I mean, I think we're trying to solve problems by definitions. That is to say, we sit here and we stipulate a definition. For me, a person will say, if God's in it, it can't be evolution. Someone else. So we just should not approach the debate this way. Let us look at the historical record and see the positions that people took. What we're going to find in the 19th century and the early 20th century as well is there are people who adopt every single one of these positions. And we cannot sit and by a simple definition say, because, for example, the great American botanist Asa Gray, whom Darwin thought was a Darwinian, whom Gray thought himself was a Darwinian, but also a believer in God. We can't sit here and say, well, he was wrong, because we're trying to solve it by 21st century definition.
Was Asa Gray a Christian, Robert?
I didn't know him. He died 100 years ago. Possibly was.
In terms of the position of theistic evolution, can you hold that position and be a Christian?
Well, he thought you could.
Yes, I wouldn't deny there are many Christians who hold that, but I don't think that it is consistent and logically. And I think what we're looking for here is clear thinking, not woolly thinking, because the issues are too important. We're talking about who we are, where we came from, why we're here. They're too important for woolly thinking, to win the day. And we have to think clearly. And truth is singular. Everything is not truth. Contradictory ideas are not altogether truth. There has to be one explanation as to the origin of the earth and where we came from and why we're here.
Peter?
There can't be a dozen that are all equally true.
Well, does there have to be a single explanation that we're all going to be able to agree on? And one of the problems I have with that position, of course, is that there are many different revelations that people... David had raised the position earlier of the non-Christian civilizations, and although, admittedly, Islamic and Christian fundamentalists are coming together to oppose evolution, are they necessarily going to agree once they've got rid of the evolutionists over which bit of revelation is the one that we have to accept?
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things is in relation to the age of the earth is that the age estimates of the earth that comes from Chinese civilizations and from Islamic civilizations are very, very similar to the young earth creationist position. And certainly from the Chinese perspective, there's a world of difference in terms of theological background.
Well, certainly that is not the case as far as the workers in this, during the period of the scientific revolution are concerned. They found Chinese chronologies that predated anything that was thought about in the Christian world by many, many thousands of years, coming from the records of their dynasties and so on, and had to undergo a number of ways of rereading the text of the Bible to try to find ways of accommodating to, at that stage, thousands of years. But these are strategies, in fact, that have continued in existence right up to the present day with many millions of years.
Do you know many working scientists in the relevant areas of science who hold that the world is 6,000 years old, Peter?
I'd be interested to find a geologist hired by an oil company who believes that. I mean, there are plenty of scientists in other areas, but I think your point is a very good one, that scientists who are actually using these ideas as the basis of their research, you don't find them in the relevant areas very often.
It'd be very difficult to explain, Norman, fossil fuels, says Peter.
Well, I mean, there's argument that, in fact, some fossil fuels like coal could, in fact, have been formed within a very short period of time, and doesn't require the long. Now,
well, do the geologists who believe that actually work at discovering new coal deposits and hired by
when you look at the what happened with the volcanic eruption at Mount St Helens, there in fact you have in the geological structure the appearance of strata which looks millions of years old according to the scientists, and yet the evidence is there that it was formed in a very short period of time.
Very last word, Robert.
Yes, there is a huge amount of evidence that both coal and oil and gas can be formed in a matter of days using the right conditions of temperature and pressure. The American Institute of Mines do that regularly. And certainly I know of 2 different Australian geologists who have been involved in that field of looking for coal and oil and gas deposits. And what they do use is very often is geology that is related to flood and sedimentation effects, because coal and gas and oil come from carboniferous materials that have been buried underwater under sediments.
Well, whether you think it's credible or incredible, the debate continues, and I think we'll be having this debate in this studio again in not very long period of time, maybe within the next 6,000 or so years. We'll be talking about it again. But my thanks to Robert Beckett, Norman Nevin, David Livingston and Peter Bowler. And Blueprint, our natural history series, begins on Monday evening, tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock on BBC One.
Well, it has come to pass again. A row over evolutionism versus creationism, and that's been provoked by a BBC programme about the history of Ireland. Hasn't yet been shown, but that doesn't make any difference. As a historical programme, it's presented by William Crawley. It makes no reference to the Christian Bible. Intelligent design et al. Well, Cecil Andrews from Take Heed Ministries in Ballynahinch considers it a gross offence to Christians. I have with me here the series editor of Blueprint, Paul McGuigan. We're also going to hear from Andrew Copson from the British Humanist Association. First, you can go in first as you're raising the issue, Cecil Andrews. We haven't seen it yet, but you're complaining in advance.
Well, David, I was first notified about this upcoming series of programmes by a parent whose child was attending a school that was planning to participate in this series of programmes. They had received an information pack from the BBC, so they were informed of what the content of the programme was going to be. So this wasn't a protest being sent or organised in the absence of any information. I was given a lot of good information. And then, of course, I did subsequently speak to William Crawley, and he confirmed the information that I had been given. So it was on that basis that I was encouraging people to contact William and express their concern about their licence fee being used to promote a philosophy that runs contrary to what they believe.
So we should promote issues of faith but not of reason.
I think that is a wrong assessment. There is nothing unreasonable about believing in creation, and in fact, I don't know whether you.
But is there anything? Sorry,
I don't know if you listened to the debate yesterday morning.
No, I didn't
hear. The sequence where William had 2 creationists, a theistic evolutionist and an atheist, and those people who gave the best scientific basis for their beliefs were the creationists. Yeah. Not the evolutionists.
But is there anything unreasonable about any broadcasting organisation, any newspaper, any magazine exploring reason as opposed to faith?
You see, you're saying that belief in creation is not reasonable, but it is perfectly reasonable, as was demonstrated by the debate yesterday morning. And the point that I'm asking is, if you've looked at our website, I'm encouraging people to ask the BBC to expend the same amount of money given Christians who are scientists who are Christians and biblical creations the opportunity to put forward the scientific basis for their faith.
Okay, all right. I will hear from Andrew Copson in a moment, but I want to hear the BBC's view on this from the series editor, Paul McGuigan. You've heard what Mr. Andrews had to say. Why are the BBC ploughing the licence payers' money into a programme or a series like this?
Well, I mean, this was a multi-platform project that has it goes back 2 years now, and The original idea was to actually make a natural history programme based on very rigorous scientific fact. And to that end, we went the length and breadth of Ireland to get scientists from all disciplines of archaeology, history, from Queen's, from University of Cork, to actually contribute. And the key word here, David, is consensus. Because what we were looking at was a consensus of scientific argument to inform this programme. And the series of programmes, it's more than just 3 television programmes. There's also a radio series as well that goes on the Saturday mornings, plus there's a website. And also there is William Crowley's blog, and also a companion piece on Wednesday nights, which gets you out and about in the countryside. But the key word here is consensus, scientific consensus.
Okay. Andrew Compson, you've been listening to this. You will not be aware of the programme, but I think you get the gist of it. You've heard this argument before.
Yes, many times. In fact, we had a very similar argument about the teaching about evolution and the use of DVD resources in England and Scotland, where there were religious groups claiming that a creationist view, a view based on the mythology of the creation stories in the Bible, should be given equal weight with a scientific view. And in the end, the government in Westminster made it very clear that creation is a faith-based view rather than a scientific, objective-based view of that shouldn't be taught in schools. So we've been through this many times.
So what have you to say to the gentleman you heard earlier, Cecil Andrews, who is objecting to this, and on behalf of somebody who describes as a concerned parent?
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing is that we can't always expect public broadcasting to reflect our own beliefs and values back to us. You know, we live in a nation, a collection of nations that is extremely diverse in all sorts of ways. People have lots of different beliefs, people have lots of different values, and to expect the national broadcaster to reflect back only a small section of that values by saying, for example, that it should pay particular attention to the Judeo-Christian tradition, I think is wrong and not what we expect out of a national broadcaster. The second thing is that when you're making a programme about natural history, about what science has discovered about the age of the world, or the formation of Ireland as it is today in a natural history sense, then of course they're going to look to natural historians. They're going to look to the science of geology and the science of biology to explain factually and objectively how things have come about. They're not going to look to the mythology of one particular religion to claim otherwise.
Now, obviously, Cecil Andrews, you believe in the biblical story of creation. I don't know how far you go in believing that, but when you talk about the world being made in 7 days, do you mean 7 days as we understand it? Does that mean a different period of time? I mean, do you believe that the earth began, 3,000, 6,000 years ago, or as some people might say, millions of years ago? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I would support a young earth creation point of view, and I certainly believe that God did create everything in 6 days and rested the seventh day.
These are normal days as we understand them at the moment.
24 hours. Right. Can I just point out to Paul, he talked about that he had got a consensus of scientific opinion. In my conversation with William Crowley, it was clear that there are no scientists contributing to this program who hold to a biblical creationist point of view, and there are thousands of them around the world. So this consensus is very unbalanced, so it is. And secondly, this idea of science, true science, is based upon observation and also what you can repeat by experimentation. Nobody was around 600 million years ago. It's a theory. And in fact, the name of the program is rather ironic. It's called Blueprint. A blueprint, in my understanding, comes from an architect. But these people are ruling out the idea that there was an architect. Yet the Lord Jesus Christ referred to himself as the architect of God's creation.
Okay,
Revelation 3,
well, I'll ask Paul to comment on that, but you don't accept, do you? I mean, I'm not familiar. I wouldn't be scientific enough to go through all of this, but there are various methods of dating. There are tree rings, there are ice cores, there are corals, there are fossils. You don't believe in any of that, do you?
Well, of course I do. That you can observe these things and understand them.
Well, but do you believe? If somebody says, sorry, Cecil,
you have to infuse your own presuppositions. Yeah. Who's to say that they are right? And by the way,
no, but do you believe that? If somebody said to you, "There's a fossil," and that tells me that fossil was around 10,000, 20,000 years ago, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a ridiculous question. Let me just put it this way, David.
Is it?
Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, and in the aftermath, there were things that happened geologically within a matter of a few years, which prior to that we were told by the evolutionists took millions of years to happen, yet within a matter of a few years those very same conditions had developed and so on. And we could observe that.
Okay, I think, were you trying to get in there, Andrew? I'll just take a brief comment from you and then from Paul, because there are listeners who want to join in the debate. Andrew?
Okay, sure. Well, I was just going to say that these are common arguments you hear from creationists or people who believe in a literal interpretation of Genesis. One, that you can't observe evolution, therefore it's not provable. Well, that's not true, because you can observe the geology of the Earth. You can observe actually also evolution as a biological process happening now.
Give me an example, please.
Yeah, of course. The finches on the Galapagos Islands that Charles Darwin first studied in the 19th century have been observed over the last 150 years to have evolved in particular ways.
No, they have varied in their species. They haven't. They're still finches.
Yes, that's right. They're now independent and different species.
Yes. Well, creationists don't.
Well, you do believe in evolution up to a point, do you?
No, I believe in variation within the species.
Okay. Well, look. I want to ask Paul about the matter raised there by Cecil. He said there isn't any consensus in this because you did not approach, or as far as he knows anyhow, there are no sort of biblical believing scientists on board. Is that true?
It is true, David, yes, but there's a reason for that. I mean, to be perfectly honest, David, what happened was that the editorial remit for the project was a natural history project, a scientifically rigorously scientifically approach to natural history. And what we did was we approached the preeminent academics throughout the island of Ireland. Religion didn't come into it.
Right.
It was about purely science and natural history.
Let me take a couple of listeners and see what they make of it. David.
Hello there.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, but I also study science at university, and I would like to point out that the modern scientific method is that science is observed, tested and proven. Now, evolution as a process of change is acceptable. For example, what the commentator just said there about the Galapagos Islands. But I'd like to point out they're still birds. Our current classification of animals is only from the 1850s.
What was what did you study at university?
Chemistry.
Chemistry, right.
But there's a bit of biology and all in there too. But those birds are current classification system came in Animal Kingdom, Hunt Kingdom around the 1850s before it was finalised. You're judging the Bible that was written thousands of years ago by a current classification system. Of course, it's not going to match.
No.
The Bible talks about kinds of animals, not individual species.
Yeah.
You show me a dog that has offspring that is not a dog, and I might start to believe in evolution. Till then, and there's no proof of that.
Yeah.
I want to move on to something else here, just quickly. When they talk about evolution, this whole overarching process, they show things like in school and university, like these finches that were mentioned. But the thing is, for evolution to happen, as the whole theory sets out as an origin of where we are, coming from the cosmos and all that, you have to have cosmic evolution, then chemical evolution, that's like your formation of oxygen, hydrogen, carbon. Then that has to become organic evolution, it has to provide life. Then you have macroevolution, changes from one type of animal into another, and microevolution.
Right.
Now, the only evidence that exists is microevolution. Right. There's no evidence for
don't lose us in the science. Andrew, do you want to have a quick word on that before I bring in another listener?
On what specifically?
What he's been talking about. Did you hear what David had to say?
Well, yes, I did. But in fact, there's no difference between evolution as a process on a micro and macro level. I mean, the large scale changes that we see, as in the origin of new species, are simply the consequences of the smaller changes. I mean, these are processes over long periods of time. So I think it's an artificial distinction.
Yeah. Let me bring somebody else in. Peter. Hello, Peter.
Good morning, David, or good afternoon, is it?
Yeah.
The gentleman who's speaking so vehemently about creationism, I listened to William Crawley's programme yesterday, and I would disagree with him that he made any good scientific arguments made by the creationists. I'm neither a Christian nor a scientist. I'm just a person who looks at evidence and makes up my own mind. And I know that whenever I had an argument about this on this same programme months ago, when someone came on and said that the world was 6,000 years old.
Yes,
there are
remember that.
Bristlecone pines and living tissue in America that are been dated to, they've counted the tree rings 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
And this whole creationist thing, there must be somebody making money out of it, because it's far-fetched. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's complete nonsense.
All right, okay, Mervyn, what have you to say?
Hello, David. What I have to say is, from a creationist point of view, I would like to raise the point that God created a mature earth. A mature earth. I listened to Mr. Andrews and would go along with what he has been saying.
Right.
But the point I want to make is that when God created this earth, he created a mature earth. In other words, Adam was mature when God created him. Trees were mature when God created them.
You were saying this is part of the miracle of creation.
Yes, I do believe that. And some of the other contributors were suggesting that God's word and the teachings of the scriptures were methodical. I would certainly not take that view.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think, it's just occurred to me, maybe it's not a question for you, but I'll ask you anyhow. I'm just reminded of the ark, the story in the Bible of the ark, and the floods and the animals going in, and when it all receded, then they would out. I mean, was every animal and every insect on the face of the earth in that ark?
Yeah, the species.
Every species?
Yes, every species was in. Animals after their kind.
Right. Okay, fair enough then. Ian, hello. Are you there, Ian?
Hello there, David. How are you? I've spoken to you before, David.
Most people have at some stage or other. Okay, go ahead.
To speak to you.
Go on.
I'm just listening to the gentleman of the creationists. Now, the man is entitled to his opinion, and I would go along with it, defend his right to say what he does. But he's trying to tell me that every natural history museum in the world is wrong. If we go by what he believes, the Bible, the earth is the center of the universe. Or the earth is the center of the universe. The sun revolves around the earth. If we believed everything he said, we would still believe that the earth is flat.
Okay, Cecil Andrews, how do you respond to that? And Ian's making a point that I'm sure other people would make.
Are you referring to the natural history museums around the world?
Yes, he's saying all the natural history museums, they have to close them all down.
Well, that doesn't make it right just because somebody says it, because, again, they're basing it on speculation, which they cannot prove, because they're talking about hundreds of millions of years ago when they weren't around. All I'm saying is that there are scientists, qualified scientists, who believe in biblical creation, who observe the evidence around the world, and it matches up with exactly what the Word of God teaches. By the way, just a secular newspaper, the Daily Express, in February, did an article called "There's a Reason for Old Blue Eyes," and it says everyone with blue eyes is related to the same ancestor who lived about 10,000 years ago.
Right. I want to ask you this final question, Cecil Andrews, because we've got to move on.
Sure.
Would it be logically possible for both to coexist, faith and reason, as I put it, that this supreme being created whatever he created, and he ensured that it developed in an evolutionary way?
Yeah, that's what they call theistic evolution. The answer to that is no.
No.
Because in Romans chapter 5, Paul makes it plain that the reason there is death in the world was because of the sin of Adam, and his sin is imputed to all living beings.
And that sin,
And the answer
hold on a second,
is the
Cecil.
righteousness of Christ.
That sin was Adam having sex with Eve, wasn't it?
No, you've tried this with me before. He disobeyed God. And
How did we get life then?
How do you mean, how did we get life?
Did Eve?
God
Hold on a second, Cecil.
Created,
did Eve produce children?
God created Adam and Eve and told them to populate the earth.
So the original sin was not sex, not having sex.
No, it was disobeying, eating of the tree of a fruit which was forbidden to him.
So it was the eating of an apple.
No, that doesn't mean, it doesn't say an apple.
Well, whatever it was.
It was just the fruit of the tree.
So yeah, okay, all right, fair enough. Thank you very much.
The answer to that disobedience is the obedience of Christ and his righteousness, which is given to all who trust